I actually grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey. When I finished all my college degrees and things like, well, not college, high school degrees, then I wanted to go to California and go to UC Berkeley. So, and I knew that I didn't have the 4.0, so I had to go to a junior college first. So I traveled 9 months from the coast of New Jersey to California. I just put all my things in my car and I drove, and it took me about 9 months. I stayed different places, and on the way I had already had a kind of like thing about martial arts and Bruce Lee and all that, that was just beginning to happen. So when I did get to California, I had a lot of adventures on the way, but when I did get to California and I decided to settle in Monterey, which is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, actually. So I said, I'll just go to the junior college there and see if I can get a 4.0, and then I'd be able to come in. And I did, and I was able to move. But the first semester that I took at Monterey Peninsula College was Aikido. I remember Mary Heine was there teaching. She's a very famous Aikido person. And I was always kind of gymnastically oriented. I was always really athletic. Did football, did baseball, did everything, And so then I started doing Aikido, and I just fell in love with it. I just couldn't believe how it was. I knew immediately it was the kind of philosophy I wanted to follow. And then I met Stan Pranin. I was doing a little bit with it was like a woman's group, and I was doing that. And then Stan Pranin, I heard of him, and then I went to his, it was like a garage. And then we started, everyone was there training already. And he was very dynamic. He was a really dynamic teacher. And so I thought, well, this is great. This is the kind of thing I want to do. I want to do something with falls and gymnastically kind of. And I remember that even at a 5th kyu, I was wanting to jump over 4 or 5 people and see if I could roll on the other side. I was always kind of like that, like a tomboy. So I was doing that a lot. So he was using me for uke a lot. And then at one point I just became uchideshi. That was my first uchideshi experience. Yeah, with Stan. So I think I was there for a year, maybe a little bit more as uchideshi, and going to all the classes and going to my college classes also. And then Stan just decided that he wanted to move up to where it was very coincidental. He wanted to move to go to UC Berkeley, but for a master's degree. And then he was going to go from there to Japan. So I said, well, you're my teacher, and I actually want to go to UC Berkeley, so it might be a little bit early for my grades, but I'll go there. And then I went to another junior college and I got my 4.0. And so then I went into UC Berkeley. Stan was already there, and then he went off to Japan. And so, but before that, we went into the dojo that was under Saito Sensei. So
the connection was already there, right?
Yes. And so Bruce Klickstein, who no longer does Aikido, you probably know the background, then he was teaching, and he was, a great teacher in a lot of ways. Nobody knew. And so then what I saw was in the Oakland dojo that Bruce actually left to go to do like a 2-year apprenticeship with Saito Sensei, and then a lot of his older students went with him, and Stan was already there. So I took a break. I had already started at UC Berkeley, so I took a break, and I said, well, just go and see how it goes. So I went there, and I already decided when I was there that I probably would end up doing Aikido very seriously, and that, I'm going to see if this is the teacher for me. So that was Saito Sensei. And within, like months, I saw that he was my teacher. So I said, well, when I go back, I'll go into Japanese as it was called at that time Oriental languages, with an emphasis on Korean or Chinese or Japanese. So I said, well, I'll do that. And but I ended up staying in Japan for like a year, and Saito Sensei, knew that things were changing because he had never had a female student that stayed that long or took it seriously. In fact, I was like the only woman there, but he was a really good teacher, and really between he and his wife and the whole family, they took me in as if I was a family member. And then by the time after a year, I could speak pretty well because there was no one else to speak to, so I had to speak Japanese. I went back to UC Berkeley, and I kept training in the Oakland Dojo, and Bruce had come back, and Saito Sensei had already started kind of using me in demonstrations, and then the odd thing was that he was an amazing teacher, and he didn't quite know how to teach women. He didn't do that so much. But he would throw me a lot, and I was fine with it, and he knew I was. And then, like, Iwama is in the countryside, and so the grass was growing, and he was saying, oh, I gotta make sure I not mow it, but cut it short, And so I said, oh, I can do that. And he goes, oh, no, Josei Dame, women can't do that. So I'm like, you just threw me across the room, and yet, And so this is an interesting story because Daniel Russell was at that time a Soto Deshi. He had learned Japanese in 6 months. He was already starting to do like a political career. He ended up years later, went to the UN, went to different places. He was a really good friend of mine, and he ended up being the director of the Security Council with Obama, and he is still doing things like that. And so he kind of had the courage to say to me, look, I will teach you how to, use the machine. And if you want to do this and, sort of challenge Saito Sensei a little bit, then go ahead, and I'm right behind you. So he set me up with it. And, it was later on that I went, he had that kind of personality. That's what took him there. And we stayed in touch a lot. And so anyway, so I went out there at 6 a.m, and I was going and going. And it's really like a big area. So it took me like 6 hours to cut everything. Then I saw Saito Sensei go into the place where we eat, and I thought, oh, he's going to be really mad at me that I did this without his permission. And this is what made me stay with him for so long as a student. He came out and he goes, Pato, thank you so much for doing all the fields. And I know it was a long work day for you. I made soba for you, so please come in and have lunch. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe he did that. So then after that, he got better and better about that whole kind of thing. And within years, he was having female students. He was understanding how they can work. And, he was an old-fashioned guy, but really an unusual person. And he had, I think you probably know, he had 23 years as Uchideshi with Sensei. And so, anyway, that was the start of it. And then I went back, and then I helped Bruce host him. So that was like in the 70s. And then, more and more, I just got more and more serious. I graduated UC Berkeley. I went straight into the Japanese consulate because at that time I thought, well, I don't know if I want to do a full thing like dojo and all that. So the general counsel, he sort of like took me in. He brought me into the economic department, and I was writing diplomatic letters. After a while, I was like, reading, like this other guy and I were reading like 10 newspapers every day, just getting the details of how Japan and America were doing trade wars. And then there was the Medfly, and then there was all kinds of things happening at that time. So I was there at a good time, but I knew that, I would look at the consuls and they didn't look so healthy and they weren't so happy. And I talked to my boss and I said, I think I might take a year off and see if it's going to work for me to do Aikido or not. And Saito Sensei was like, you could do this. You'd be like one of the first women that would have a dojo. So, and he was already using me for kind of a lot of big demonstrations and for books and videos. And so I took a chance. I went in to a dojo where it had been Taekwondo, but the guy got a sheriff's eviction. So I, had to just see if I could bargain with the landlord. And he said, well, you have a sheriff's eviction, so you can stay, and I won't charge you any rent because you're not going to have lights or water for 6 months. And so you just do it, you can build your place. And it was already kind of built up. There was walls and carpet and mirrors. So I did a lot. I had a lot of students that helped me build more things inside the dojo. We trained in the morning, so I didn't need lights. And then at night, we had sort of lanterns. And then before I knew it, 6 months was up. And then he only charged me something like $800 a month for the place. And it was a pretty big place. And where is it? San Leandro, California.
Where you are?
Yes, and I never moved. I stayed there. The landlord the mom of the landlord that is still there. It was like an old-fashioned thing. I would go pay my rent, I would visit her at her house, and I would pay her rent. And serious, it was like this. She would say, "Honey, I know you're young and you're wanting to do a business, so I'm going to give you a couple of things of advice now. I got you a bag of groceries because you don't seem like you have much money." And then she would say, "And I made you lunch." I mean, she was just like a mom, an Italian mom. And I grew up with an Italian family, so, it was like that. So, so she kept me going, and they didn't raise the rent so much. Then I made a shorter trip to Iwama, and then when I came back, she had passed away. And before she passed away, she said to her son, "You take care of that young girl, and she's going to be okay, but you promised me you'll do that." And he did for all these years. We just had our 40th anniversary, and I had my 50th year in Aikido. And so it was, like that. And I kept on, just building my dojo, doing different sort of, like we made it bigger, and we built rooms in the back so we could have uchideshi. And it ended up, we had 4 rooms, and then the couch, and then people stayed on the mat and stuff. So when we have the events, then we have those. And, I have to say, like, everything was blessed. I knew that Aikido had a purpose for the world. I knew that. I knew that Sensei had that in mind. And so as I kept on going, more and more the philosophy and the spirituality of it became more important to me. Even though I kept going back to Iwama, and and then I had the privilege of training, like all the guys would sleep in the on the mat. So because there was so many of them, and sometimes there were some rooms, but the old dojo was connected and still is to Sensei's house. So Saito Sensei would say, okay, all the guys are there, you can't stay in there, so I'm going to put you in Sensei's house. And so I slept in his bedroom. He had already passed away. Sometimes I slept in his wife's room, depending on what was going on. And it was such a beautiful energy in there. And I also felt like I had lots of dreams about Sensei and other things. And so I felt like, from that time that there was something I could do for the world. I didn't know exactly what it was. Now it's more clear to me. And, I felt that even though our style, Iwama style, it's pretty physical and a lot of weapons and a lot of things like that. But within that, I felt there was the spirit of Sensei and Aikido, and that Saito Sensei also had that spirit, but he just didn't talk about it so much. His son did. His son and I were about the same age, and we sort of grew up together from the time we were teenagers. Very much so.
Was it the case for Morihiro Saito?
He wasn't as interested, but then in the middle of everything, he'd be in the field, we'd be doing the weapons, and he would just sometimes he would just go off and chop wood and come back, and he would take his jo and do that thing that Sensei did, just connecting. And then a lot of times he would just do different things. He would say, let's do Aikido blindfolded, let's do Aikido in a way that we can go from basic to movement to advanced techniques. And he also was told by, Hitohiro was going to this Uranaishi. Uranaishi is like a psychic in the Iwama town. So Hitohiro was going to her and just asking her about some things. And she said, I see that your father has this old man with a beard sitting next to him all the time. And so Hitohiro said, that's my dad's teacher, that's Sensei. And then a few other things would happen like that. And then sometimes when he would come to teach, like seminars, and then we were just together, then he would say some things, Saito Sensei would, but not as much as Hitohiro. Hitohiro would say, at that time his name was Hitohiro, and it's hard for me to say Hitohira because I grew up with him, And so with he and I, we would, just talk about things together and talk about the spirituality. One time he had like a Japanese reporter come and ask him about Kotodama, and then I just stayed with him and translated the Kotodama meanings. And that was like really easy for me because we would talk about it all the time. There was so many, and a lot of times when he came to California, he was just doing technique after technique. And in his later days, I remember one of the last demos, it was like the all Ibaraki, and then he looked like O-sensei, and he was doing all kinds of things with me and Nemoto. So he would say to us, let's do blindfolded today. Let's do this. And he even said, he goes, in America and in the foreign countries, you can be really creative and nobody thinks you're like kind of odd. He said, but it's hard to do it in Japan. But he said, I have foreign students, so I can kind of do that. And then, he would just experimenting with different things. And I saw that about him. And so I knew that the didactic kind of approach was there too, because maybe somebody comes in and they've never done Iwama style, so he has to do that. And then someone that's been there for a long time, he starts pushing them to Takemusu Aiki. And so, yeah, he wasn't just technique at all. And he talked about O-sensei being next to him, in another dimension. He would talk about, different things. But one time I was doing kind of tarot cards, and I said to him, so, do you want me to do tarot? Because I did it with Hitohiro, and he was right there with me. I actually helped answer his question about should I cook and do Aikido, and then the tarot cards gave him that. And but then Saito Sensei went, I ato de, the thing ato de, and then it was a joke with Hitohiro and I that anytime he would go like ato de, like, and it'll never happen, So it was kind of like that. But he was amazing that way, but couldn't actually see it all the time, and people did see him as like strict, and he was very disciplined, but he was also like big-hearted. He was amazing that way, and Hitohiro's like that too, So yeah, and Oak-san, geez, was like the toughest woman I ever knew, but in a really good way, And I would always say to Saito Sensei, well, why don't you bring your wife with you? He finally did, so. We went to first Hitohiro Saito Sensei's house. Was so glad to see everyone, and then we went over to see Inagaki Sensei, and then we walked up to Tago-san. We saw the jinja, and it was like a beautiful day.